Hey y'all! It's entry number 60 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Aaron Jones, running back, Green Bay Packers. We'll start with the positives with Aaron Jones' fantasy profile, dual threat and pass catching potential in 2022. Aaron Jones has proven himself to be a very capable dual threat back as he's carried the ball at least 170 times and caught at least 45 passes in each of the last 3 seasons. In addition, the Green Bay Packers traded star wideout Davante Adams to the Las Vegas Raiders this offseason, and will have a much weaker wide receiver group than they've had in recent years. What this could mean is that the Packers utilize Aaron Jones as a pass catcher more because he's clearly solid in that area and is clearly one of the team's top 2 offensive playmakers. There's a very strong chance that he puts up career-high numbers in the receiving department for 2022, which bodes well for his fantasy value. The next thing I really like about Aaron Jones' fantasy profile is that he's got a solid offensive line. The Green Bay Packers offensive line ranked 14th last year according to Pro Football Focus, which was pretty good considering they had some key injuries to the group throughout the year. Going into the 2022 season, they are projected to be the 5th best offensive line in the league according to Pro Football Focus. And if David Bakhtiari comes back fully healthy, they should be an elite group. The last major thing I like about Aaron Jones' fantasy profile is that he's got a running back friendly head coach. Matt LaFleur has generally done a good job of utilizing and getting production out of his running backs over the course of his career, and it showed last year as both Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon got a decent amount of touches. Having an offensive play caller who has a history of getting the most out of his running back room should only help Aaron Jones in 2022. Moving on to some of the concerns with Aaron Jones' fantasy profile. We'll start with the fact that A.J. Dillon deserves a ton of touches as well. A.J. Dillon has showed that he's one of the more talented running backs in the league and more of a 1B to Aaron Jones' 1A than a number 2 back. Last year, on the ground, Dillon carried the ball 187 times, which led the team for 803 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. And he proved that he can be a capable pass catcher as well, as he caught 34 passes on 37 targets for 313 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. In addition, for what it's worth, A.J. Dillon has also posted higher Pro Football Focus grades than Aaron Jones over the last 2 years. As long as A.J. Dillon is in the mix, Aaron Jones will have to share the workload a little bit. The next concern I have with Aaron Jones' fantasy profile is, will the Packers offense be as good in 2022? The Packers traded away their star wideout, Davante Adams, this offseason, and will have a lot of unproven pass catchers on the team going into 2022. In addition, the team lost their offensive coordinator from the 2021 season, Nathaniel Hackett, as he left to become the Denver Broncos head coach. With these key losses, there are some questions on if the Packers offense will still be a top 10 offense in 2022. If they do take a step back as a whole, that would likely impact the number of scoring opportunities for Aaron Jones. The third major concern I have with Aaron Jones' fantasy profile is his 2021 red zone usage split. A.J. Dillon had more red zone rushing attempts last year than Aaron Jones, with 39 compared to Jones' 34 according to NFL Savant. Given that A.J. Dillon is a physical freak who weighs 250 pounds and has a solid 4.53 40 speed, it's likely that the Packers continue to utilize Dillon in a good chunk of red zone rushing situations. This may limit Aaron Jones' rushing touchdown upside compared to some other running backs going around his draft range. Some additional thoughts on Aaron Jones. In 2021, Aaron Jones finished as the RB13 in Standard with 177 total fantasy points and 11.8 fantasy points per game. The RB12 in half PPR formats with 203 total fantasy points and 13.5 fantasy points per game, and the RB11 in full PPR formats with 229.0 total fantasy points and 15.3 fantasy points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. During the 2021 season, In half PPR formats, Aaron Jones had 2 out of 15 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 3 out of 15 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 5 out of 15 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 2 out of 15 games with 15 to 19.9 fantasy points, 2 out of 15 games with 20 to 25 fantasy points, and 1 out of 15 games with over 25 fantasy points according to fantasy data. In 2020, Aaron Jones was the RB5 in standard with 211.9 total fantasy points and 15.1 fantasy points per game, the RB5 in half PPR formats with 235.4 total fantasy points and 16.8 fantasy points per game, and the RB5 in full PPR formats with 258.9 total fantasy points and 18.5 fantasy points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. According to RotoWire, Aaron Jones posted a broken tackle percentage of 17.9% in 2020, which was above average, and also posted a broken tackle percentage of 17.5% in 2021, which was also above average. In 2020, Aaron Jones averaged 1.43 yards per route run, the 11th best among running backs, 5.9 yards per touch, the 4th best among running backs, and 1.43 yards created per touch, the 19th best among running backs according to Player Profiler. He also had 8 carries for over 15 rushing yards and evaded 55 tackles. Personal opinion. Aaron Jones is currently going off the board as RB11, about pick 23 overall on ESPN, and RB12, about pick 20 overall on Yahoo. This feels like an appropriate draft range for him. Jones might not quite have the same fantasy upside he once did, with A.J. Dillon now in the picture, but I expect the Packers' offense to be centered around their backfield this year, and Jones should be a pretty safe bet to finish as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, as long as he's healthy. For each of these entries, we highlight a charitable organization or cause that the player is passionate about. Aaron Jones' My Cause, My Cleats in 2020 was for Alex's Lemonade Stand. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.